Look at that, eh? Pretty good, pretty good. So far we've looked at nearly all of the standard open chord shapes. We've got a couple more that we haven't looked at. One of them would be the A chord, the A major chord. And we have looked at the A minor chord. So one of those notes needs to be brought this way, needs to be raised to make it into a major chord. And it's the one that I've got my first finger on there. So it's going to be, I'm going to rearrange my fingers so I've got those three straight across there. I'm playing from the A string down. Now there is a shortcut, a lazy way of playing this. A lot of the times if I'm having to play this in a song, instead of putting those three across there, I will just put one finger flat across. Now that's going to turn that high E string note into an F sharp note, right? It goes from that sound to that sound, which is sort of an A6, more of a jazz sounding chord, which is usually not what we're after. So knowing that, I just avoid the high E string with my picking hand here. I just only strum the middle four strings. Really, who's going to hear the difference between that and that? It's only that high E string that makes a difference, which is a little bit out of tune anyway, so we really don't want to hear it. Okay, so there's the A. Now, if we were to try to go through the alphabet, we've got an A chord, major and minor. We don't have any options for B yet, and there's a reason for that, because there isn't a standard open chord shape that we use for a B, so we'll save that till the next lesson. C we know, we don't have a C minor, so we need to work something out for that as well. D we know. Now, we haven't looked at a D minor yet, but we may as well learn it right now, so that we know one of those notes needs to be lowered, move towards the nut by 1 fret, and it's the one that I've got my middle finger on that it needs to be lowered. So I can't twist it that way, so I just need to switch those two fingers over. So I've got my first finger on the first fret of the high E string. And it sounds like this. So just like a standard D chord, we can only play from the D string down. D major, D minor. Now we're going to E. We got E major and also E minor. The next one would be F, we've looked at, so we've got that one there. Remember that first finger's got to be flat across both of those strings for the F chord. And G we've got. So we don't have G minor, we don't have F minor either. We'll learn some options for that. Okay, so whenever you're learning a new chord, or if you do feel like you're struggling with any of the ones that we've already looked at, it really is just a matter of going through it and going through the motions hundreds, thousands of times. Alright, so the D minor is a new one we've just learned. We play it, take it off, put it back on. Take it off, put it back on. Right, it's going to take you a little while each time, but it'll just get a fraction of a second faster every time you do it. C chord, now I'm going to start off putting them on one at a time. Make sure they all sound out. Take it off, put it back on. Take it off, back on. And then we're going to go through the transitions between all those chord shapes we've got now. So we could just choose 2 or 3 chords. We'll start with one of the new ones. I'm going to go from an A chord. Practice moving that onto a D chord. Maybe to a G chord. Yeah, E chord. E minor chord. A minor chord. You get the idea. Just transitioning from any of the chords that we know into any of the other chords we know. But for now, we're just trying to, I guess, train our ears to recognise the sound of some of these different varieties of chords. So we're not looking at major and minor anymore. We're looking at sevenths, and we're going to make our way to major sevens and minor sevens as well. So just to get used to the sound of them, if we just do a bit of a side-by-side comparison here. So there's a C chord. We compare that to a C minor chord. Okay. Here's our C7 chord. This is a new one. You can see it's got that, as soon as we hear that sort of, I don't know, bluesy, jazzy, funk music kind of sound, the C chord becomes a C7 chord. That's probably the most common of the other types of chords, the sevenths and the extended versions of them. And if you've heard musicians talk about ninths and 13ths and sharp 5 flat 9s and things like this, the most common of the slightly the altered chords would be just our sevenths to start with. Okay, so if we do a couple more comparisons there, here's an A chord, here's an A minor chord, here's an A7 chord, and then from there we could talk about it an A minor 7 or an A major 7. So again, we do this comparison on a C chord. He's in a C major, C minor, C major 7, C dominant 7th, or just what we would write as C7, and C minor 7. So we could try to use descriptive words for what all those, the character that each of these chords have. So the simple description that we started with major and minor was one was happy, one was sad. Whether or not that's accurate, I'm not sure about that. But from there, you know, the major 7 has a kind of a really dreamy kind of quality to it, you know. So you're not going to see that one popping up in heavy metal styles of music as often. The minor 7. I don't really know how we describe that one, but it's a pretty cool sounding chord, the minor 7. And then dominant 7 again has that bluesy sound. So what are the actual shapes as far as which ones? We're going to just look at sevenths now. So as we write a chord as a C7, we do mean dominant 7th, which means nothing to us so far anyway until we do the scale analysis chord construction lesson. So the open chord shapes that we can use for forming 7th chords, dominant 7ths that is, would be, here's a C chord. In fact, I'm going to just go through the alphabet. So we're going to start on A. In order to make an A chord into an A7, all we've got to do is lift that middle finger up. There's an A7. So you'll notice that the way I described the difference between a major and a minor chord was that one note moves by one fret. Now the difference between a major chord and a 7th chord is that one note, a different note from the one we shuffled around to switch between major and minor, in order to create the 7th chord, one of these notes needs to be lowered by 2 frets. So what we did with the A chord, we just lifted that finger off, and you'll notice that means that note, an A, turned into a G note. And an A7 chord, you could also play it with these 2 fingers, and some people do it that way. I don't find that as comfortable. I'd almost use those 2 fingers before. Moving on to a B. Now, because we don't have an open chord shape for a B, we could be lazy and skip over this, but no, here's a quick shape I'll show you for a B7. Here's the C chord, C7 just gets that little finger on the 3rd fret of the G string. Just that sound. It's not as obvious there that I'm actually taking one of those notes and lowering it by 2 frets, but I am doing that. That note there that I'm playing is a C note. 2 frets lower than that would be a B flat, which exists right there. So there's a C7 shape. Tricky one there, but D, it's a bit more obvious. There's D major. So to make this one a D7, then B string, where I've got my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret, we need to play a note on the 1st fret there, so we need to shuffle around our fingers just like we did with our D minor chord. Okay, moving along, the way we'd play an E7 chord, well, we know that we need to lower one of those notes by 2 frets. So if there's our E major shape, it's just a matter of lifting the 3rd finger off. There's E7. So with an F chord, again, it's a bit tricky to move one of those notes by 2 frets. Now, there's a way we could do it. You know, you could play an F7 chord with that shape there, but I wouldn't actually recommend learning it that way. We're going to look at a better sounding way of doing the 3 different types of 7th chords. And the next letter in the alphabet would be G. So if we go from our normal G chord, the note that we need to lower by 2 frets is the one I've got my 3rd finger on, the 3rd fret, the G note up there. I want to move that to an F, so I've got that. So you can see that the shape that my fingers are forming there is kind of very similar looking to a C chord. So if we came across a song that was switching back and forth between a C chord and a G7 chord, which is a pretty familiar sound, there are a lot of songs that use that chord sequence. Nice easy one because our fingers are already in that layout. That's all the dominant 7s. So now we'll learn just a couple of options for open chord shapes for major 7 chords, and then we'll do minor 7 chords. Now the note that we were moving around on those dominant 7s we just looked at, that we moved down by 2 frets, so for instance the A chord that I lifted my middle finger off to make it an A7 or A dominant 7, to make that an A major 7, I'd lower it by just 1 fret, not 2 frets. So it makes this one a trickier chord to play because I don't lift my middle finger. I have to get something onto the 1st fret of that G string there. And it sounds like this. Moving through the alphabet, we skip B. C, it's an easy one for us because all we have to do is lift that first finger off. That's lowering the note by 1 fret. Changes that sound into this sound. C major 7. Yeah, D, it's a nice easy one because we're lowering that note on the 3rd fret by just 1 fret. So really we can just put that finger flat across. That's D major 7. For E major 7, there is a chord shape that we could use, but I'm going to skip it for now. And F is another nice easy one because we don't have to keep that finger flat across both of those two strings. I can just have that first finger on the 1st fret of the B string, and then I want the open E string to be sounding out. So F major 7. And so the last chord in the musical alphabet would be G. Now we could make a G major 7 by trying to get the note on the 3rd fret of the high E string to the 2nd fret somehow, and really it's a pretty awkward one to play, that one, so again, don't worry about it too much. Okay, back to the start, and starting at A again, this time minor 7s. Okay, and then so we start with our minor shapes, so we know an A minor. And again, we're going to just need one of those notes to be lowered by 2 frets. So for the A shape, it's going to be the note on the G string. The 2nd fret on the G string just gets lifted off, and now we've got an open string there. That's A minor 7. B, well, we're getting good at skipping over B. C, now C minor 7, again we have to go to bar chord, we'll skip that as well. D minor 7 we can play, so again we start with the D minor shape, which we know. And the note that needs to be moved is on the B string, on the 3rd fret, needs to move to the 1st fret, which leaves us with a pretty comfortable shape to play there. And that's a D minor 7. Up to E, again we go for our E minor shape, which is just those two. To make that into a minor 7, all I've got to do is lift off the note on the D string. Pretty rough sounding one, but it'll work. Okay, and F minor 7, we'll skip, same with G. Alright, so that's all. There's only a couple of shapes there with the major 7s and minor 7s. We really need to find some sort of movable shape now that we can use anywhere, and that's for another lesson.